The locked front door clicked behind my son as he told me the business was no longer mine. Still, I kept my hand on the cold handle, breathing slow, refusing to give him the anger he wanted. As the metal chilled my palm, the silence of my own house grew louder than his words. While that same cold spread through me, I realized betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. The same door I built was now proof that blood doesn't protect you from greed. That's when I decided the lock would teach him what inheritance really costs. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Joseph woke up early as he always did. The soft golden light of the morning streamed through the bedroom window, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. He stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his back, a reminder of the years spent building something that meant everything to him. It was quiet in the house, the stillness wrapping around him like a comfort. This was a day like any other, or so he thought. Downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread wafted through the air as Joseph walked into the kitchen. His wife, Samantha, was already there, sipping her coffee with a quiet smile. The house felt warm, welcoming, as it always did when it was just the two of them. But there was an unease in the air today, something Joseph couldn't quite place. David walked in with Rebecca, his wife, just as Joseph sat down at the breakfast table. His son looked different, tense, maybe even cold. Joseph looked at him, raising an eyebrow as he noticed the serious expressions both David and Rebecca wore. Something was off. David cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Dad," he began, his voice tight, "Rebecca and I have decided to take control of the family business and the estate." Joseph's fork clinked against his plate, the sound sharp in the stillness. He stared at David for a long moment, trying to process the words. It felt like a punch to the gut, even though his son's words were measured. Control? Of everything. He hadn't seen this coming. Control? Joseph's voice was low, almost a whisper. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What are you talking about? This is my business, my legacy. I've spent my whole life building this." David's eyes darkened, a familiar anger bubbling up that Joseph had seen many times before, but never quite like this. "You think you own everything," David shot back, his voice rising now. "You hoard all the power, all the decisions, and leave me out of it. You've always treated me like I don't matter." Joseph's chest tightened. He knew David resented him. Hell, he could feel the distance between them growing over the years. But to hear it laid out like this, to have his son accuse him of something so personal, it cut deeper than anything. "David," Joseph began, trying to stay calm, to reason with him, "I built this for all of us. You were always going to be a part of it, but you've got to understand the responsibility, the weight. I'm not just giving everything away." David's face twisted with anger, and without warning he stood up from the table. "You don't get it, Dad," he snapped, the words coming out in a rush of bitterness. "You're not family anymore." Rebecca, standing beside him, shot a quick glance at Joseph, her face a mask of quiet support for David. She said nothing, but her silence felt like a confirmation of David's stance. Joseph felt the world around him shift, as if the ground beneath him had cracked. He stood up, his legs feeling heavy, like he was about to collapse, but David was already walking toward the door, heading to the front entrance. Joseph followed him, trying to get a word in, but before he could, David slammed the door behind him. With a sickening click, Joseph realized that David had locked him out of the house. The house, his house, the home he'd built with his own two hands, the place that had always been a symbol of his success. He stood there for a moment, stunned, his breath catching in his throat. The air felt suddenly thick, suffocating. The hurt of betrayal hit him in waves, but deeper than that was the rage, the overwhelming fury that his own son could do this to him. Joseph stood frozen for a moment longer, his mind a whirlwind. He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, but he knew he couldn't let it consume him. He had to think. He had to act. Without a word, he turned and walked away. But deep down, something inside him shifted. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Joseph stood on the porch, the cold morning air biting into his skin, his hand still resting on the doorknob where he had just been shut out. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a stone, suffocating. His mind raced, unable to keep up with the cascade of emotions threatening to drown him. Betrayal, anger, a kind of hollow grief. David's words echoed in his head, "You're not family anymore." They rang louder than the slam of the door. Joseph could feel the tension rising in his chest, his heart pounding against his ribs. How had it come to this? How had his own son turned against him so completely? His gaze wandered to the windows where he could see David and Rebekah moving about inside, their voices muffled but unmistakable. They were settling in, like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just shattered everything Joseph had built. The house, the legacy, the life they'd once shared. He clenched his fists, pressing them against his sides as if trying to hold himself together. This wasn't just a disagreement. This wasn't just a moment of youthful defiance. This was betrayal, deep, cutting, and final. David had crossed a line, and Joseph couldn't just let it go. Samantha's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see her standing at the edge of the driveway, her face pale, worry lines etched deep. She had always tried to mediate between them, but this was different. David was no longer listening. He was already dug in, unwilling to compromise. "Joseph, please," Samantha said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "don't do this. Let's find a way to talk to him to fix this." Joseph looked at her, his eyes dark with resolve. "There's nothing left to talk about," he muttered, his voice low and rough. He made his choice. Samantha reached out, placing a hand on his arm, but Joseph shook his head, stepping away. She didn't understand. She couldn't. This wasn't about pride or control anymore. This was about everything Joseph had worked for, everything he had given up, every sacrifice he had made to build a future for his family. And now David was taking it all, like it meant nothing. He turned away from her and walked toward his car, his footsteps heavy, as though the weight of the moment was pulling him down with each step. Sitting behind the wheel, he stared at the house in front of him, the house that should have been his fortress, his legacy. But now it felt like a prison, its walls closing in around him. He thought about the years of tension, the strained dinners, the moments of silence between him and David. It hadn't always been this way. There had been a time when he and his son had been close, before the resentment had built, before David had grown resentful of him. Joseph had tried to guide him, to teach him. But maybe, just maybe, he had been too controlling, too distant. Maybe it was his fault. No, he refused to believe that. He couldn't. He had done everything for this family, and David had thrown it all away. A surge of anger flooded through him, hot and burning. His fingers gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. He wasn't going to let this stand. He couldn't. The thought of giving up, of just walking away, made him feel like he was losing more than just a son. He was losing everything he had ever worked for. He started the car and pulled out of the driveway, his mind already racing with plans. Legal action, financial moves, anything to take control back. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As he drove, the image of David inside the house, the smug look on his face as if he'd won, haunted him. Joseph could still feel the sting of his son's betrayal, but he wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. Joseph sat across from his lawyer, the weight of the situation sinking deeper with every word. The small office felt suffocating, the air thick with the looming decision he had to make. His lawyer, a sharp, seasoned professional, tapped his pen nervously against the desk as Joseph outlined his plan to take control of the family estate. "You're sure about this, Joseph?" The lawyer's voice was measured, cautious. "Changing the deed this way, it's drastic. It could escalate things beyond your control." Joseph's jaw tightened. He had known the consequences. He wasn't naive. This was no small move. But what was the alternative? Let David walk all over him. Let the son he had raised tear down everything he'd worked for simply because of some misplaced sense of entitlement. No, he wouldn't let that happen. Not now. Not ever. I'm sure, Joseph replied, his voice steady, but the fire inside him was unmistakable. This is my last shot. I need to make sure the estate is under my control. If I don't act now, I lose everything. The lawyer hesitated, then nodded slowly, his fingers moving over the paperwork. Very well. But understand, Joseph, this will tear the family apart. You're not just taking the estate back. You're making a statement, one that David won't take lightly. Joseph didn't flinch. The decision had already been made. David had left him no choice. The feeling of betrayal still burned in his chest, but there was something else simmering beneath it. A resolve, a determination to regain what was his. The house, the legacy, everything he'd built. It was all slipping away, but not without a fight. Get it done, Joseph saw. His voice cutting through the tension in the room. I'll sign whatever needs to be signed. I'm not backing down. The lawyer proceeded with the paperwork, explaining the details, the potential fallout, and the steps necessary to ensure the deed transfer was legally binding. Joseph listened intently, his mind already racing ahead. He would need to move quickly before David could react. The clock was ticking, and he could feel the pressure building. Later that night, as the darkness outside crept in, Joseph sat alone at his desk. The signed document spread before him like a map to his future. His hand hovered over the papers, the weight of the decision heavier than any burden he'd ever carried. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, but now he was about to push all his chips to the center of the table. The minutes stretched on, the ticking of the clock sounding louder with each passing second. The house was silent, save for the distant hum of the city beyond. Joseph glanced at the clock again, just hours left. His resolve never wavered. This was the only way. He picked up the phone, dialing the recording office, confirming the transfer would be made just before dawn. As he hung up, he turned back to the deed. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. There was no going back. As the night wore on, Joseph sat in the quiet, watching the clock tick ever closer to the moment that would change everything. His mind raced. What would David do when he found out? Would Rebecca stand by him, or would she finally see the truth? Either way, Joseph knew this was just the beginning. The first light of dawn broke through the curtains. Joseph's hand trembled slightly as he signed the final document, the weight of his actions settling over him. The deed was done. The estate was his. But in that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. Joseph sat by the window, the first light of dawn creeping through the blinds. The night had felt endless, a quiet storm swirling inside him. But now, as the sun slowly lifted over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, there was a strange sense of satisfaction in his chest. He had done it. He had outwitted David. He had secured the estate, the family home, his legacy. The deed was his. For the first time in what felt like forever, Joseph allowed himself to feel a small measure of power, the kind he hadn't tasted in years. David had thought he could just take everything from him. But Joseph had played the game smarter, and now he held the cards. The weight of the decision still pressed on him, but in this moment, as the sun rose over the sprawling estate, Joseph couldn't help but feel a sense of control again. He stood up and walked to his desk, checking the documents one last time. Everything was in order. The deed had been transferred to his name. There was no going back now. Joseph knew that this was a turning point. He had won, but at what cost? His phone buzzed, cutting through the silence of the morning. It was a message from his lawyer, confirming that the legal changes had been recorded. He looked out the window one last time, feeling the weight of the coming storm. Within hours, that storm would arrive. The house was still, the morning air carrying a quiet tension as David walked through the front door, his face still drawn from the previous night's confrontation. He had been up late, pacing, fuming, trying to figure out how to reverse what had happened. But nothing prepared him for what he saw as he stepped into the study and found Joseph sitting there, calm and collected. The deed, still on the desk, was no longer in David's name. David froze, his mind racing as he pieced it all together. The deed. It had been changed. Without a word, he stormed toward Joseph, fury boiling over. "You did it. You actually did it," David hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You manipulative bastard. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? This was never about family. It was always about control." Joseph didn't flinch. He simply met David's eyes, his gaze unwavering calm. "I did what I had to do, David. You forced my hand." David's anger was a boiling pot now, bubbling over in the silence. "Forced your hand," he laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You've always been the one pulling the strings, haven't you? Well, not anymore. This isn't over." Rebecca stood in the doorway, her presence barely noticed until she spoke. "David," her voice was soft, but it stopped him in his tracks. "Is this really the way you want to handle this?" David turned to her, his face twisted in frustration. "You're asking me that now, after everything he's done?" His voice rose again, fueled by the betrayal that cut deeper than he cared to admit. But Rebecca didn't back down. "I'm asking because I'm starting to question if what he did is really all that wrong. We've been taking from him for so long. Maybe it's time we stop blaming him for everything." David's face hardened, his chest heaving with anger. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're siding with him now," he spat. "This is my inheritance, my birthright." Joseph remained silent through it all, watching the scene unfold. He didn't need to defend his actions. He had done what needed to be done. The legal right was his. The estate was his. David stepped closer, voice low and threatening. "Undo this. Now, I want the deed back in my name. You don't get to do this." Joseph's gaze remained steady, his voice firm but calm. "It's already done, and I'm not changing it." The tension between father and son hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Joseph felt something stir inside him, a realization that this moment, this small victory, had come with an irreversible price. He was in control again, but the rift between him and David had grown wider, deeper, and more dangerous. As Joseph stood there, the weight of his decision settled over him. This wasn't just a fight for the estate anymore. This was war, and the battle had only just begun. David's fist slammed into the doorframe as he stepped into the room, his face twisted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You've crossed a line this time, Dad," he shouted, voice hoarse with anger. His eyes burned with the kind of rage Joseph hadn't seen in years, not since the early days when David had first started pushing against him, testing his limits. But now this was different. This was no longer a simple disagreement. This was war. Joseph didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch, still seated at the desk where he had spent the better part of the morning reviewing legal documents. His calm demeanor only seemed to fuel David's rage further. "What the hell did you think was going to happen?" David spat, pacing in front of him. "You think you can just take everything from me and not face the consequences?" Joseph's gaze was steady, his voice low but cutting. "I didn't take anything from you, David. You took it from me. Years ago, when you started thinking you could walk all over me, take everything for granted as if I owed you the world." David stopped pacing, his chest rising and falling with quick, sharp breaths. "That's bullshit. You've been controlling everything my entire life. The business, the house, the family. You've hoarded it all like some damn dictator. You never gave me a chance to prove myself." Joseph's eyes darkened, a flash of bitterness crossing his features. "Prove yourself. I gave you everything, David. I taught you everything I knew. And what did you do? You threw it all back in my face. You never wanted to build anything. You just wanted it handed to you. And now you come in here accusing me of destroying the family." David's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms as the words spilled out, sharp and bitter. "You've already destroyed it. Look at what you've done to us. Look at what you've done to me. You've kept me in your shadow my whole life, and now You think I'm supposed to sit back and watch you take everything we built together?" Joseph's voice cracked through the tension, a mixture of hurt and anger. "You think I haven't sacrificed everything for this family? I've given up more than you'll ever understand just to keep it all together. And now, you want to tear it down because you feel entitled to it." Rebecca, standing at the door, looked from one man to the other, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped in between them. "Please, both of you, just stop. This isn't helping anyone." But David wouldn't have it. He shoved past her, his anger boiling over. "No, Rebecca, he's been suffocating me for years, and now this. This is the last straw. I'm done being his little puppet. I deserve better than this." Joseph stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a sharp sound, his voice thunderous now. "You think you deserve better? You're damn right you deserve better. Better than the way you've been treating me. Better than the way you've been taking everything I've worked for. You've been trying to destroy me for years, David. You and your mother. You've been pushing and pushing, and now you want to accuse me of destroying the family." David's face twisted with hurt, and for a fleeting moment Joseph saw the son he used to know. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold defiance. "You're right," David said, his voice quieter now but laced with venom. "You've already destroyed it, and if you don't undo this, I'll make sure it's over for good." Joseph's jaw clenched and the room grew still. For a moment everything seemed to hang in the air, the weight of their years of unresolved bitterness crashing down around them. Joseph took a step forward, his voice like ice. "If you keep this up, David, I'll cut you out of the will completely. You'll have nothing, not a damn thing." David's eyes widened, the final threat landing like a punch to the gut. He looked at Joseph for a long moment, the heat of the confrontation burning between them. Then, without a word, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Joseph stood there, chest heaving with the aftermath of the explosion. A strange sense of triumph welled up inside him. He had stood his ground, he had made his point, but it was quickly overshadowed by the hollow emptiness that followed. The rift between them had just grown wider, and for the first time, Joseph wasn't sure if there was any coming back from this. The days that followed the confrontation were heavy with silence. The house, once filled with the hum of daily life, now felt like a cavern, the air thick with unresolved tension. Joseph sat in the study, staring at the same documents he had reviewed 100 times before. He couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to David's face, the hurt, the anger, the betrayal. Samantha tried, as she always did, to mend the rift between them. She called him several times, left messages begging for reconciliation, but Joseph was in no mood for it. She even went to David, pleading with him to talk, to listen. But David was unmovable, shut off like a fortress. He refused to engage. Every word from him felt like another hammer strike to Joseph's chest. It was as if his son had given up completely, not just on the family but on him. Joseph had never felt more alone. He thought of the years of tension, the growing divide between them. Had this all been inevitable? Was there really a way to avoid it? The legal victory, was it worth it? The thought gnawed at him, each question more biting than the last. He'd taken control, but had he really won? Or had he simply ensured that he would never have his son back? Rebecca's call came just after dinner, a quiet, hesitant voice on the other end. "Joseph, we need to talk." His stomach churned at the sound of her voice. She had always been the bridge between him and David, the peacemaker. But now she sounded like someone trying to hold the pieces of a shattered vase together, knowing it was beyond repair. "David's not himself," Rebecca said, her words clipped, almost angry. He's lost it. He's pushing me away. I don't know how much more of this I can take. We're falling apart, Joseph." Her words hit him like a slap, but there was no anger in them, just a quiet resignation. Joseph closed his eyes, his grip tightening around the phone. This wasn't the woman who had once defended him, even when David turned against him. It was someone caught in the middle, torn between her husband and the father-in-law who had given her everything. "I don't know what to do anymore," Rebecca continued. I've tried to make him see reason, but he won't. He's convinced this is all your fault." Joseph swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deeper. "I didn't want this, Rebecca. I never wanted this. But David, he didn't leave me a choice." "I know," she said, her voice softer now, but the damage was already done. "But now it's like the house is divided. We're all just picking sides and it's tearing us apart." The phone call ended with a promise to talk again soon, but Joseph felt the weight of it settle over him. He knew, deep down, that he had crossed a line that once crossed could never be undone. A few days later, Joseph's worst fears came true. David had gone to his lawyer trying to reverse the deed change. The legal battle was inevitable. Every call, every email felt like a new wound opening. The endless back and forth, the mounting pressure, the paperwork, it was all starting to feel like a war that would never end. Joseph sat in his office, his gaze drifting from the papers to the window, watching the world outside move on while his own life felt like it was slowly unraveling. He had won. He had taken back control. But at what cost? The house, the estate, the legacy. What did they mean if his own family was slipping away? A cold shiver ran down his spine. He had never imagined it would come to this. Would David ever forgive him? Would they ever be able to rebuild? Or had his need to protect his legacy cost him the most precious thing he had, his son? As the weight of his decisions bore down on him, Joseph realized something he had been avoiding. He wasn't just fighting for control of a house. He was fighting for his own soul. The envelope sat on Joseph's desk, its pristine white surface mocking him with its sharp corners. He had been expecting it. He knew what it would say. But the moment he opened it, it felt like a dagger. A letter from David's lawyer demanding the return of the estate. Joseph's eyes skimmed the words, his grip tightening around the paper. He read it again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. David wasn't backing down. The battle had begun in earnest now, and it would only escalate from here. But Joseph didn't flinch. His fingers brushed over the legal terms, the threats, the demands. He had prepared for this. He had the law on his side. The deed had been changed legally, recorded properly. The estate was his, no matter what David or his lawyer thought. He set the letter aside, his jaw clenched as he tried to quell the storm brewing inside him. This was not over. David had crossed a line, but Joseph wasn't going to let him take it all back. This wasn't just about the house. It was about everything Joseph had worked for. It was his legacy, his life's work, and he wouldn't let it slip through his fingers so easily. Samantha entered the room, her face pale, her eyes filled with that familiar concern. She had been watching Joseph carefully since the confrontation, trying to gauge where his mind was. "Joseph," she said softly, sitting down beside him, "I'm begging you, this isn't worth it. Please think about the damage this is doing to the family, to David, to us." Her words hit him like a cold splash of water, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm not going to back down, Sam. I've worked too hard for this. You know that." "But at what cost?" Samantha's voice cracked, the weight of her emotions seeping through. "You're losing him, Joseph, your son. You're pushing him further away. Is it worth destroying everything?" Joseph looked at her, his eyes hard. "What would you have me do, Sam? Let him take everything. Let him walk all over me like he always has." Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but the words faltered. She could see the anger in his eyes, the fury that had been building for years, but she knew better than to push him further. He was beyond reasoning now. In the days that followed, the battle shifted into the public eye. David had taken the war to social media, to their friends, to the extended family. He painted Joseph as a manipulative tyrant, a man too blinded by his greed to see the damage he was causing. The accusations stung, but Joseph didn't flinch. David's anger had reached new heights, the emotional war now spilling into every corner of their world. His posts, his calls, his threats, everything was designed to make Joseph feel small, to shame him into reversing the decision. It was a battle of wills now, and David was determined to win. He had always been good at fighting dirty, at twisting the truth, and now Joseph could see the depths to which David would go. Joseph, however, remained steadfast. Each accusation, each post only strengthened his resolve. This wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about control. His control. He had built this life, this empire, and no one, especially not his son, was going to take it from him. Days turned into weeks and the emotional toll grew heavier. Joseph had stopped communicating with David altogether. Every conversation felt like a battle he couldn't win. Every word from his son cut deeper than the last. He had tried for years to keep things civil, to be the father he thought David needed, but it was never enough. Now, the emotional weight of it all was too great. The strain of trying to salvage what was left of their relationship had drained him. The situation was escalating faster than he had anticipated, but Joseph was beyond caring. He had made his choice and there was no turning back now. His victory wasn't just about reclaiming what was his. It was about regaining control of his life. The price? It was steep, but he was determined to pay it. The phone call came on a cold, overcast morning, its timing as relentless as everything else David had thrown at him. Joseph sat at his desk, the legal papers laid out in front of him like a map to an uncertain future. The message was clear. David had filed the papers to contest the deed change. The battle for the estate was now a full-blown legal war, and Joseph knew it was going to be long, brutal, and relentless. David wouldn't back down, not now, not after everything that had transpired. Joseph steeled himself as he hung up the phone. The weight of what was to come settled on his shoulders. He had been prepared for this moment, but no amount of preparation could cushion the impact. He was fighting not just for property, but for something deeper. His legacy, his sense of control, the life he had spent decades building. David was determined to take it all away, and that meant Joseph couldn't afford to show weakness, even for a moment. The legal proceedings were ugly from the start. David went public with the fight, accusing Joseph of selfishness and greed, painting him as a villain to anyone who would listen. Every accusation hit its mark, spreading like wildfire. Social media posts, family gatherings, and whispered conversations turned into a battleground where Joseph was the enemy. The public pressure began to mount. At first, he thought he could ignore it, but the whispers turned into a roar. Samantha could see it too, the toll it was taking on him. She watched him grow more tense with every passing day, his shoulders heavy with the weight of a battle that was slowly consuming him. Yet, even as the world around him turned on him, Joseph refused to back down. He saw it as a matter of pride now, not just for the estate but for himself. He would not let David rewrite the story. He would not let his son paint him as a villain when, in his heart, he knew he had only done what was necessary. The law was on his side. The estate was his. But as the weeks dragged on, Rebecca's frustration with David's tactics grew. She had been the one to call Joseph, pleading for him to reconsider, to find another way, but now she found herself caught in the crossfire of her own husband's war. She stayed by his side, but her quiet moments with Joseph revealed cracks in their unity. She wasn't sure where her loyalty should lie anymore, not when David's bitterness threatened to tear everything apart. Joseph felt a twinge of guilt when he saw her, the silent toll this was taking on her as well. She was losing her husband, losing her place in the family, and he couldn't help but feel responsible. Yet, his resolve remained unshaken. He had to win this fight for his own sake. As the legal battle dragged on, Joseph began to realize something he had been avoiding for weeks. It wasn't just about the estate. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about winning back his self-respect. The quiet realization cut deeper than he expected. The fight was no longer just about the things he had lost, but about the man he was fighting to be, the man who hadn't let anyone take anything from him. But even as his resolve held strong, the toll of the battle began to wear him down. The late nights, the endless legal meetings, the public humiliation, it was all taking its toll. His mind felt foggy, his body heavy with exhaustion. The fight, it seemed, was endless. David's tactics grew more ruthless. He wasn't just fighting legally anymore. He was playing dirty, going after Joseph's reputation, his character, everything he had worked for. The emotional cost was higher than Joseph could have imagined. The relationship between father and son, once fraught but salvageable, now seemed irreparably broken. Joseph sat at his desk late one night, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. There were no answers here, just more questions. How far would this go? How far would he have to push? Could he even win this battle without losing everything that truly mattered? The weight of it all crushed him, but he knew one thing: he wasn't stopping now. Not after everything he had sacrificed. The fight was far from over, and neither of them was willing to surrender. The sound of the phone vibrating on the kitchen counter broke the silence. David glanced at it briefly, then let it buzz on without answering. His mind was miles away, still stuck in the maze of courtrooms, legal battles, and the endless cycle of accusation and defense. He hadn't slept in days. The relentless fight for the estate was slowly suffocating him, but he couldn't admit it. Not yet. Rebecca was sitting at the table, her eyes tired, her face worn by the strain of trying to keep everything taut. She watched him, her gaze filled with something between concern and disappointment. "You're not sleeping," she said quietly, though it wasn't a question. David rubbed his eyes, his exhaustion weighing him down. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, trying to brush it off. "The fight has to end. I have to finish this." Rebecca didn't say anything right away. She knew he was struggling, knew he felt cornered, but she also knew that this war with his father was destroying him, destroying all of them. "Is it really worth it?" she asked gently. David's shoulders slumped. He stared down at his hands, fingers tapping nervously against the table. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual, a trace of regret slipping through the cracks. "It's like I've lost control of everything. I wanted to prove something, but now I don't even know what I'm fighting for." Rebecca leaned forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "David, you've lost so much already. Your father, your family, this thing, the estate, it's not worth it. It never was." David looked away, his pride still clawing at him, making it hard to admit what he was feeling. "I can't just give up," he said, though the conviction in his voice was faltering. "Not now, not after everything that's happened." She reached out, placing a hand on his. "Maybe it's not about giving up. Maybe it's about making things right before you lose everything." David was silent for a long time, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He couldn't escape the truth anymore. He had pushed too hard, too fast, and now he was staring at the wreckage of his relationship with his father. He had wanted control, but what had he gained? A fight that would destroy them both, a future that seemed more like a battlefield than a home. Finally he exhaled, defeated. "What do I do now?" he whispered. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She simply squeezed his hand and nodded. "Make things right. It's not too late." And with that, David made the call. The phone rang once, then twice, before Joseph's familiar voice picked up on the other end. "Hello." David swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Dad, it's David. I want to talk. Can we meet?" Joseph's pause on the other end of the line felt like an eternity. There was no rage, no immediate rejection, just silence. Finally, Joseph's voice, rough but measured, came through. "What do you want, David?" David hesitated but then pushed forward. "A truce. I think we need to stop. Stop the fighting, stop the lawsuits. I don't want to lose what's left of us." The words hung in the air. Joseph knew he had the upper hand. The law was on his side, but he also knew something more, something unspoken. The damage was done, but perhaps, just perhaps, this was the only way to begin healing. David's voice was uncertain now, but it was real. "I've been wrong, Dad. I see that now. I don't want to destroy us anymore." Joseph let the silence stretch. The legal battle was a war he was winning, but the family was lost in the ruins. He had to decide, could he put the estate aside to rebuild something that mattered more? Finally he spoke, his voice steady but tired. "All right, we'll pause, but this doesn't change everything. We still have a long way to go." David nodded, relief and uncertainty washing over him. "I know, but it's a start." As the call ended, both men were left with the same gnawing question. Had they done enough to undo the damage? The road ahead was unclear, but at least they were walking it together for now. David paced in the living room, his fists clenched, every muscle in his body taut with the frustration that had been building for weeks. This was it, the final confrontation, the moment where everything would either be settled or torn beyond repair. He had tried everything, legal action, public accusations, even pleading with Joseph behind closed doors, but nothing had worked. He couldn't let it end like this, not without a fight. Joseph stood by the fireplace, his back straight, his face composed. He had expected this meeting, had braced himself for it. But no matter how many times he told himself he was ready, the tension between them still stung. Father and son. The line between them had been fractured for so long, but now it was shattered. There would be no going back. David stopped pacing, his voice sharp. "This is illegal, you know that, right? The deed change. You can't just take the estate like that. You're stealing from me." His words were laced with anger, but there was something else too, desperation. He needed to win this. He couldn't lose everything to his father. Joseph's gaze didn't waver. His voice was steady, almost detached, as if this argument had played out 100 times in his head already. "I did what I had to do, David. The estate was always mine. I had every right to secure my future and protect the legacy I built." David's face reddened, his fists tightening even more. "A legacy? Is that what you thought? NK, this is some legacy. You're destroying our family, Dad. For what? A house? Money?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and grief. "Is this really what it's all about for you? Because if it is, then you're not the man I thought you were." Joseph stayed silent for a long moment, the weight of his son's words hanging in the air. He had heard this before, the accusations of selfishness, of greed. But it was different this time. This time, it felt like the very last thread of trust between them was unraveling. Rebecca, who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward, her eyes flicking between the two men. She had stayed quiet until now, trying to keep the peace, trying to hold on to the family she once knew. But she could see it now, the irreparable damage. "David, Joseph, please, this isn't the way." Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight of frustration. "This isn't just about the estate. This is about everything. The years, the family." David snapped at her, his anger now turned on her too. "Don't you see? He's making this about money, about control. It's not just a house, Rebecca. It's everything. It's me. It's us. And he's willing to burn it all down." Rebecca recoiled slightly, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She had always tried to shield both men from the worst of it, but now she felt as if she were being torn in two. "David, I'm not," she began, but Joseph cut her off, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I'm not going to reverse the deed, David," Joseph said, his eyes locking with his son S. "I've done what's necessary, and if you can't see that, then there's nothing left for us to talk about." David's face twisted with frustration, his eyes wild. "You have to do the right thing. You have to fix this. Don't you care about me at all?" Joseph took a slow breath, his heart heavy but his resolve unwavering. "You've lost my trust, David. I can't fix this anymore." The silence in the room was suffocating. Rebecca's eyes flicked back and forth between them, but neither man moved. The air felt thick with everything they hadn't said, every wound left unhealed. David opened his mouth again, but the words didn't come. He just looked at his father, the realization slowly settling in. There was no going back. The line had been drawn. Finally David turned, his back stiff, his face set in stone. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I'm done here." And with that he left. Joseph stood still, watching him go. The weight of the moment pressed on him, but there was no satisfaction in it. Only a cold, empty knowledge that the last shred of hope for reconciliation had slipped through his fingers. The courtroom doors had barely closed when the war truly began. David's new lawyer, a sharp, aggressive figure, took a seat across from Joseph's legal team, and the tension was palpable. The air between them crackled with the weight of the fight that had only just begun. David had found someone who was willing to fight as ruthlessly as he was. The ink hadn't even dried on the papers before Joseph's phone rang with the announcement: David was going for broke. He wasn't just contesting the deed. He was going to tear apart everything Joseph had built. Joseph, though caught off guard, didn't flinch. He knew this was coming. The gloves were off now. He hired his own lawyer, a seasoned veteran with a reputation for dragging out fights until the other side bled dry. Joseph had never been more prepared. In his mind, this was the final move, the one where he could either win it all or lose everything. The stakes had never been higher, and Joseph was determined to hold on. The legal process was a beast unto itself. Court dates, motions, endless paperwork. Each round felt like a slow and deliberate burn. The media picked up on the story, turning the father-son conflict into a public spectacle. Public accusations began flying in every direction. Joseph was portrayed as a heartless businessman, someone who had denied his own son his rightful inheritance. Meanwhile, David was painted as the entitled heir, out to destroy the man who had made him feel less than his entire life. It was a fight of perception as much as it was a fight for the estate. Samantha watched from the sidelines, torn between the two men she loved. She had always tried to keep the peace, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The emotional toll of the war was palpable in their house. She found herself caught in the crossfire, her pleas falling on deaf ears. "Please," she begged, her voice strained and desperate, "this isn't worth it. Both of you need to stop. You're destroying everything. The family, the legacy. Is it really worth it?" But her words, like so many before, were ignored. Joseph, his face pale and drawn, simply turned back to the piles of documents. His exhaustion was evident, but his resolve was ironclad. He couldn't give up. He wouldn't. This was his final chance to reclaim control over his life, to put his stake in the ground and say, "This is mine." Yet despite the steely exterior, something inside Joseph was breaking. His health began to show the signs. He couldn't sleep, the weight of the battle eating away at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The headaches came more frequently, the pain in his chest unbearable at times, but he pushed through, fueled by sheer will. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. David, on the other hand, was spiraling. Rebecca could see it. His mood swings grew more intense, the anger more volatile. The man who had once been her husband was slipping away, consumed by the battle with his father. He was no longer the same person. And as he raged against Joseph, Rebecca found herself questioning everything. Was winning this fight worth it? Was the estate truly worth tearing apart the family for good? The fear in her eyes mirrored the fear in her heart. She could see the destruction, but she didn't know how to stop it. Joseph, increasingly isolated from both his son and his wife, felt the weight of the war pressing on him. His mind wandered, a quiet question nagging at him. How long could this go on? The war had become a part of his daily life, but at what cost? He could feel the strain, but he couldn't stop. Not now. In the quiet moments, when the chaos of the legal proceedings seemed to fade away, Joseph asked himself the hardest question of all. Was it worth it? Was this battle truly worth sacrificing his relationship with David? And yet the fight raged on, its end nowhere in sight. The courtroom was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioning. But outside, the world was anything but silent. The legal battle between Joseph and David had gone from private struggle to public spectacle. The tension between father and son had become headline news, the drama of their dispute playing out in full view of the world. And David had just poured gasoline on the fire. It started with one accusation, one explosive statement that would change everything. In a press conference, David stepped to the podium, his face flushed with anger, his hands trembling slightly as he addressed the cameras. "My father," David said, his voice cutting through the crowd, "is nothing but a tyrant and a manipulator. He's been pulling the strings his entire life, forcing me to live in his shadow. And now he's taking everything that's mine." The words hung in the air, each one more venomous than the last. The media erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters clamored for more, and social media buzzed with a frenzy of activity. The story of their family feud, already tragic, was now a public spectacle. The world seemed to eat it up, feeding on the drama and the pain that Joseph had tried so hard to keep behind closed doors. Joseph sat in the quiet of his office, the weight of David's words sinking into his chest like a stone. It wasn't the first time his son had accused him of being controlling, but this was different. The public humiliation was a blow he hadn't expected. The pain of David's words went deeper than any legal challenge. This was about reputation, about pride, about losing everything he had worked for in the eyes of the world. But he wasn't going to let it break him. He clenched his fists, the anger rising. This was about more than the estate now. It was about defending what he had built, the legacy that David seemed so eager to tear down. The world might believe David, might side with him, but Joseph knew the truth. He had every right to protect what was his. He wasn't backing down. Rebecca stood at the window, watching the storm unfold outside. The battle between Joseph and David had become impossible to ignore. Every phone call, every argument, every glance between them seemed to grow more bitter. She knew that this was beyond anything she could mediate, but she still couldn't stand to see them like this. Turning to David, her voice was soft but firm. "David, this is too much. You've crossed a line. These tactics, they're not going to fix anything. You're destroying our family." David didn't respond right away, his eyes fixed on the news coverage flashing across the screen. He could feel the weight of his actions, but pride kept him from admitting the damage he was causing. The anger in his chest burned hotter than ever, but beneath it there was something else, a creeping doubt. He'd always believed he was right, but now the cost was becoming too high. His actions were affecting not just Joseph, but Rebecca too. The public image, the media frenzy, it was all out of control. He stood, pacing across the room, his mind wrestling with what to do next. For the first time, the weight of the public eye felt suffocating. The anger that had driven him this far seemed to crumble under the pressure of what was slipping through his fingers. Finally, David stopped, his voice quieter, almost reluctant. "I can't keep doing this," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I can't keep fighting like this. It's destroying everything." Rebecca looked at him, her expression torn. "Then stop, we've lost enough." David nodded, his mind already racing. He couldn't undo the damage, but there was one thing he could still do. He could offer a truce. A way out, though it would come at a cost. The question was, could he salvage anything from the wreckage? The next day, David reached out to Joseph. The message was simple, but its weight was heavy. A truce. But David's terms were harsh. There was no going back to what they once had. Joseph stared at the message, the words echoing in his mind. A truce. Was it too late? The silence between them stretched, the path ahead unclear. Neither of them knew if reconciliation was possible. But one thing was certain, the battle had reached its breaking point. The message arrived late one night, its words striking Joseph like a thunderclap. David wanted to talk. After months of legal battles, public accusations, and a family torn apart, his son had reached out with an offer, a truce. The text was straightforward, almost cold in its simplicity. "Let's settle this outside of court." A 50-50 split of the estate. David was offering an end to the battle. No more lawyers, no more public fights. Just a clean break, with each side walking away with half. It was a pragmatic offer, one that on the surface could resolve everything. But for Joseph, it wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about everything that had been lost in the process. The years of tension, the love that had turned to resentment, the relationship with his son that now felt beyond repair. Joseph stared at the phone screen, his hand trembling slightly. A 50-50 split. It sounded simple, but he knew better than anyone that nothing between him and David had ever been simple. He wanted to take the offer, to end the chaos, to stop the bleeding. But his pride, his sense of justice, his need to hold onto what he had fought for, they all made him hesitate. Rebecca was the first one to speak when Joseph shared the message with her. She had been caught between them for so long, torn between her loyalty to David and her concern for Joseph. "I think it's a good idea," she said quietly, her eyes softening with the suggestion. "It's the only way we can stop this. The legal battle, the fighting, it's killing us all. We need to end it, Joseph, for all of us." Joseph nodded slowly but didn't say anything. He had known this moment would come. He had always known that the offer for peace, if it came, would be on David's terms. A 50-50 split. Was that fair? He had worked for everything he had. He had sacrificed so much. But the price of that victory had been everything else. Trust, family, the future. "I just don't know if I can trust him," Joseph muttered, the words laced with frustration. "After everything, how can I believe him now?" Rebecca sighed, her face drawn with worry. "David's offering peace, Joseph. He's admitting that things have gone too far. Maybe it's time to think about the bigger picture." Joseph turned away, looking out the window as the dark cityscape stretched in front of him. Peace. Was it really possible to find peace after everything? How many bridges had been burned? How much damage had been done? Could he really walk away from this fight without feeling like he had lost everything? The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights. Joseph couldn't shake the thought of David's offer. He went over the terms in his mind over and over again. A 50-50 split, a fair compromise on paper, but something inside him resisted. Why now? Why had David come to him with this offer after everything? Samantha, too, could see the toll it was taking on him. "Joseph," she said one night, her voice gentle but firm, "for the sake of your health, and for the sake of what's left of your family, maybe it's time to end this. You've fought enough. Maybe it's time to give in." But giving in felt like losing. Was it really worth it? Joseph agreed to meet with David privately, though every part of him bristled at the thought. He knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. They hadn't spoken face to face in so long. He wasn't sure if they even knew how to talk to each other anymore. And yet, in the silence of those sleepless nights, Joseph realized something. This fight couldn't go on forever. He didn't know if he could ever forgive David. But maybe, just maybe, this was the only way to stop the destruction. The meeting was set. The questions, the doubts, the emotional cost, they all lingered in the air, waiting to be addressed. But when Joseph walked into that room, he didn't know if he was ready to face his son. Not as a father, not as a man who had everything to lose. And as he waited for David to arrive, one thought echoed in his mind. Could a truce really heal what had been broken? The room was tense, the silence thick as both men sat across from each other. Joseph stared at David, his son's face more worn than he had ever seen it. The anger and resentment that had once consumed him seemed to have drained away, leaving something raw, something almost unfamiliar. The air felt charged, and Joseph knew this wasn't just another confrontation. This was the moment they either tore everything apart for good or tried to salvage what remained. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes avoiding Joseph's for a moment before he looked up, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't want to tear the family apart, Dad," he said, the words coming out softer than Joseph had expected. "I've never wanted that, but I've been so damn angry for so long I couldn't see past it." His gaze faltered as he took a deep breath, the weight of what he was saying settling over him. "I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I was just trying to fight for something I felt I deserved, and now I see what it's cost us." Joseph's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his son's voice. This wasn't the brash, stubborn man who had locked him out of the house. This wasn't the son who had declared he wasn't family anymore. There was a sincerity here, a crack in the armor David had built. For the first time in years, Joseph saw his son, not as an enemy, but as a person who had been hurt, who had been wronged in ways Joseph hadn't fully understood. David's hands trembled slightly as he continued, his voice lower now, almost defeated. "I'm sorry for how I've acted, for what I said to you. I don't know how to fix it, but I know I've done too much damage already. I just want it to stop." The apology hung in the air, and for a moment Joseph didn't know what to say. His chest tightened, not from anger but from something else, something deeper, more complicated. The battle had always been about more than just the estate. It had been about trust, about pride. And hearing David admit his faults, admitting his own part in the destruction, hit Joseph harder than he expected. Joseph leaned back in his chair, the fight within him warring with the sudden pang of guilt. Was this how it ended? His grip on the edge of the table tightened as he glanced at his son, seeing the raw emotion in David's eyes. He had spent so long convinced that he was right, that this battle was justified. But hearing David's apology forced him to question everything. Had he gone too far? Joseph's voice cracked for a second, his emotions threatening to spill over. He cleared his throat. You don't know what this has cost me, David. This fight, this everything. But hearing you say this, it's not what I expected. He paused, his eyes meeting David's. But it doesn't mean everything can be fixed just like that. Trust doesn't come back overnight. David nodded, his face full of regret. I know, I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, but I needed you to know how sorry I am. Joseph took a deep breath, the weight of everything still hanging over him. We can't go back, David. We can't undo what's been done. But maybe we can find a way forward. The tension between them eased, just a little, as they began to discuss the terms of the settlement. They agreed on a compromise, nothing perfect but fair. Joseph would retain control of the estate, but David would receive a portion, a recognition of his own place in the legacy. The deal seemed done, but as Joseph signed the papers, a question lingered in the back of his mind, one he couldn't shake. Could they ever rebuild what had been broken? The truce had been made, but as Joseph looked at his son, he wasn't sure if it was the first step toward healing or the calm before another storm. The settlement had been signed, but the air between Joseph and David was still thick with unspoken words. The papers had been inked, but the emotional scars were far from healed. They had come to an agreement. David would receive his share of the estate, a fair compromise, but no amount of paperwork could undo the years of betrayal, anger, and resentment that had built up between them. Rebecca, ever the peacemaker, had breathed a sigh of relief when the legal battle was finally over. The constant pressure, the media circus, the endless meetings with lawyers, it was all behind them. But even as she tried to find comfort in the resolution, she couldn't shake the unease that still hung in the air whenever Joseph and David were in the same room. The tension between them was palpable, and no matter how many times she tried to bridge the gap, the rift remained. Joseph had agreed to start rebuilding his relationship with David, but it wasn't easy. Every conversation felt like walking on broken glass, each word weighed down by years of resentment. Joseph found himself struggling to look past the anger that had festered for so long. He tried to reach out, to engage, but the effort felt hollow. Every attempt to reconnect felt like a reminder of everything that had been lost. Samantha, watching from the sidelines, saw the toll this was taking on Joseph. She had always known he was stubborn, but the emotional cost of this battle had drained him in ways she hadn't anticipated. One evening, as Joseph sat alone in the study, going over old papers, Samantha asked the question that had been hovering in the air for weeks. Joseph, are you truly ready to forgive him? Her voice was soft, but there was a sharpness to it, as if she had been holding this question in for far too long. She stood at the door, her eyes searching his face for any hint of the man she had once known, the man who had believed in family above all else. Joseph didn't answer immediately. He felt the weight of her question, the depth of it, and he wasn't sure how to respond. Could he forgive David, after everything that had happened? The years of frustration, the betrayal, the way David had publicly humiliated him, it all still lingered. The pain was fresh, and it felt too soon, too raw to even think about forgiveness. But as he looked at Samantha, he realized that the question wasn't just about David. It was about him too. Could he forgive himself for allowing the relationship to get this far? I don't know, Sam, Joseph admitted, his voice rough. I don't know if I can ever trust him again. How do you come back from something like this? Samantha walked into the room, sitting down beside him. You don't, not completely, but you can try. You can start small. Don't let this tear you apart too. Meanwhile, David, on the outside looking in, seemed to recognize the weight of his past mistakes. The anger that had once driven him seemed to have given way to something softer, something that made him look at his father with a mix of regret and sorrow. He made small gestures, offering to help with the family business, reaching out to Joseph with tentative words of reconciliation. But each attempt felt fragile, as if he wasn't sure how to cross the bridge he had burned. The family remained fractured, the bond between father and son weakened, but not entirely gone. Joseph and David spoke, but their conversations were always cautious, the space between them filled with the ghost of everything they had lost. And though they both seemed willing to try, neither of them knew how to truly rebuild what had been shattered. Joseph sat in the quiet of his office late one night, wondering if it was even possible. Could they ever fully heal? Or had too much damage been done for anything to truly mend? As the silence pressed down on him, he realized there were still questions left unanswered, questions that neither he nor David had the answers to. And in that uncertainty, the family remained at a crossroads. The evenings were quieter now, less fraught with the sharp tension that had once defined every interaction. Joseph and David had started taking small steps toward reconciliation, the kind of steps that felt fragile, tentative, like walking on thin ice. Dinner, once a battlefield, had become an occasional neutral ground. They sat across from each other, their conversations polite, almost formal, as if they were both afraid to disturb the fragile peace they had begun to build. They spoke of surface-level things, the weather, the business, the state of the world outside, but nothing deep, nothing that might bring the walls crashing down again. Neither of them was ready for that. Rebecca watched them closely, her relief mixed with worry. She had always been the mediator, the one to hold the family together when it threatened to split apart. She had seen this slow thaw between her husband and father-in-law, but she knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. "You're making progress," she said one evening, after Joseph and David had finished a quiet meal together. "But you both know that avoiding the hard conversations won't fix anything. Maybe it's time you took a bigger step." Joseph looked at her, his gaze hardening slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice defensive. "I'm suggesting therapy," Rebecca said gently. "It's a way for you both to understand what's been going wrong, to finally talk about what's been buried for so long." Joseph stiffened at the suggestion. He had always believed in facing challenges head-on, not through the lens of a therapist. And David? Joseph couldn't imagine his son agreeing to such an idea. There were too many years of hurt, too much resentment built up for a simple session to untangle. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with both of them. "Therapy? Really?" His voice was sharp, laced with skepticism. "You think that's going to solve everything? A couple of sessions and poof, we're all better." Rebecca's expression softened, but she didn't back down. "It's not about solving everything. It's about learning to trust again, to rebuild. We can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." David's eyes flashed, and for a moment Joseph could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. But this time it was quieter, less explosive. David had spent years bottling up his emotions, trying to prove something that in the end hadn't been worth it. Joseph felt a pang of guilt then, a realization that perhaps he had been too demanding, too controlling over the years. But the thought was fleeting. Joseph had always believed that control was necessary, that it was the only way to ensure stability. Letting go felt like weakness. "I don't know if I can do it," Joseph said quietly, his voice betraying the uncertainty he had been hiding. "I've always tried to protect everything we built, but maybe I put too much pressure on you, on us. I don't know how to undo that." David's face softened, though the resentment still lingered in his eyes. He had tried in his own way to trust his father again, but the years lost, the damage done, it weighed heavily on him. "I'm trying, Dad, but I don't know if I can forget what happened. All the time we lost. The damage it did." The weight of David's words hung in the room, thick and suffocating. Joseph looked at his son, his heart heavy with guilt and a growing sense of helplessness. Maybe we can't forget, but maybe we can learn to live with it. Samantha, standing by the doorway, had been listening quietly. She had always been the one to hold out hope, even when things seemed impossible. "It won't be easy," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But you have to try, for both of you." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken truths, the air heavy with the burden of their shared history. Finally, Joseph spoke. "We'll try. For you, Rebecca. For the family." David nodded, his expression guarded, but there was a glimmer of something. Maybe hope, maybe resignation. Neither of them was fully convinced that therapy would help. But for the first time in a long while, they both understood that trying was the only way forward. As they agreed to take the next step, the question still lingered. Would they ever truly heal? Or was this just another fragile attempt at patching up what had already been broken beyond repair? The room was sterile, clinical, with soft beige walls that seemed to close in as Joseph and David sat across from each other. The therapist, a woman in her early 50s with an empathetic expression, sat between them, her pen poised over a notepad. The silence stretched between the two men, thick and uncomfortable. Joseph shifted in his seat, the tension in his shoulders evident, while David stared at the floor, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. For a moment no one spoke. The weight of the past hung in the air, palpable, suffocating. Joseph's mind raced with thoughts of how they had gotten here, how everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. He had hoped that therapy would offer a quick fix, a way to mend what had been broken. But now, sitting in this sterile office, he realized how naive that was. This was going to take time, time he wasn't sure he had. The therapist cleared her throat gently, breaking the silence. "Let's start by just talking. It's okay if it's hard, this is a safe space. David, why don't you begin?" David's gaze shot up at the mention of his name, but he didn't speak immediately. Joseph watched him, his heart pounding in his chest. The anger that had once been so easy to express was now buried beneath layers of confusion and regret. This wasn't the son he had fought with for years. This was a man, worn by battles, with a quiet pain Joseph had never fully understood. Finally David spoke, his voice raw. "I never felt loved," he admitted, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Growing up, I always felt like I was just there, like I was never enough." His voice cracked as he looked at Joseph, the weight of the words heavy between them. "You were always there, but you were always focused on the wrong things. The business, your legacy, and I was just in the way." Joseph's breath caught in his throat. The words, the truth, hit harder than any confrontation had in years. He had always thought he was doing what was best for David, hing him to succeed, to be more. But hearing his son say that, the truth in his voice, tore at something deep inside Joseph. "I didn't know," Joseph murmured, his voice hoarse. "I never knew you felt that way. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was preparing you for life, making sure you had everything you needed." He paused, his hands trembling. "I was afraid, afraid of losing you, of losing control of everything. I pushed you, David, because I didn't know any other way to keep you close." The therapist nodded gently, guiding them forward. "Joseph, it sounds like you were doing what you thought was best, but David needed more than just your protection. He needed your love, your attention." Joseph's eyes flickered to David, his chest tightening. "I didn't know how to give that. I didn't know how to just be there for you. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." David shifted uncomfortably, his face still guarded. "I get that now. I do. But when you keep pushing someone away, it makes them feel invisible. And I started to believe I didn't matter to you." The silence in the room felt heavy. The therapist allowed them a moment to process, her gentle presence a steady anchor as Joseph and David began to see the fracture in their relationship from both sides. Joseph's mind raced as he reflected on the words they had just shared. The emotional wall between him and David, built over years of misunderstanding and pride, hadn't come down entirely, but it felt like a crack had appeared. It was a start, a long, painful start. As they left the session, Joseph felt a strange exhaustion settle over him. He wasn't sure how much had been resolved, but the conversation had opened something. There was a path forward, even if it was obscured by the fog of years past. He glanced at David, walking quietly beside him. It wasn't a victory. It was a beginning, but that at least was something. The question remained, could they continue to break down the walls, or had they already gone too far to ever truly rebuild? The therapy sessions had become a routine, a slow, grueling process that neither Joseph nor David fully embraced. The silence between them had softened, but the weight of their past was still heavy. The rawness of their earlier conversations was beginning to settle into something more measured, something that hinted at real change, if only they could find a way to navigate the pain that lingered. Today, there was something different in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before, the kind that came when two people, no longer sure of the boundaries between them, tried to decide what came next. As they sat across from each other, Joseph's eyes were weary, but there was a quiet resolve in his gaze. He had been prepared to fight for the relationship with his son, but something about today felt different. They had been working through the surface issues, but now, they had to face the truth of it. The truth of what was broken and what was left to rebuild. David spoke first, his voice quiet but steady. "Dad," he began, his words slow, careful, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've talked about. I know we've come a long way, but I can't keep living like this. I need my independence." He glanced up at Joseph, his eyes tired but honest. "I love you, but I need to stand on my own. I need to be able to make my own decisions, live my own life." Joseph's chest tightened at the words, the ache of it familiar, the fear of being left behind. For years he had held on tightly, certain that his way was the right way, certain that control was the only thing that would protect them. But now, sitting across from David, he understood. He understood the need for space, for autonomy. It hurt, yes, but he realized that holding on so tightly had only pushed David away. The realization stung deeper than he'd expected. "David," Joseph said, his voice rough, "I'm not trying to control you. I've always been scared that if I let go, everything we've built, everything I've worked for would just slip away." He paused, taking a breath. "But I get it now, I do. You need to grow, you need to find your own way, and I can't keep standing in your way." David's expression softened, the bitterness that had marked so many of their past conversations beginning to fade. "I didn't want to push you away, Dad. I needed you to see me, for who I am, not just as your son, but as myself." Joseph nodded, the weight of the conversation settling deeper into his bones. They weren't done, not by a long shot, but they had taken the first steps, the real painful steps toward understanding. "We'll take it slow," Joseph agreed. "One step at a time, no rushing, no expectations, just trying." Rebecca, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up, her voice soft but filled with hope. "I'm relieved," she said quietly, "that you two are finally talking like this. It's progress, real progress." She glanced at them both. Her expression a mixture of exhaustion and optimism. "Maybe we all need a break, a family vacation, just the three of us. A chance to ease the tension, get away from everything." Joseph and David exchanged a look. There was still so much unspoken between them, so much to untangle. But the thought of a trip, of time away from the mess, felt like a glimmer of hope. Joseph sighed, the uncertainty of the future hanging in the air. "I don't know what's going to happen, Rebecca," he said, his voice softer now. "But what we're doing now, this feels like the first step toward healing." David didn't say anything, but his gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, Joseph saw a flicker of something familiar, something that hinted at the possibility of what they could be if they both tried. "We'll try," David said finally, his voice steady. "No promises, but we'll try." Joseph nodded, a small, uncertain hope building inside him. There were no guarantees, no clear path ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt the faintest stirrings of something that resembled possibility. And with that, the door to their future, uncertain as it was, began to open just a crack. The house was quieter than it used to be. The usual chaos of the holidays, people laughing, arguing over dinner, the sound of distant music was muted. But this year there was something different. The family had come together for a small holiday gathering, a tentative attempt at normalcy. Joseph watched as David, Rebecca, and Samantha moved through the living room, a little too carefully, as if each step had to be measured. The effort was evident. Everyone was trying, but there was still an unspoken tension that lingered in the air. Joseph's eyes followed David as he helped Samantha set the table, his movements slower than usual, more deliberate. It wasn't the typical rush of a holiday meal. David had always been the one to rush through these moments, impatient to move on to whatever came next. But tonight he paused, he lingered. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Joseph noticed, and for the first time in a long while, a flicker of something, hope maybe, stirred inside him. The dinner table was small, just the four of them, but it felt like a mountain to climb. Joseph's gaze met David's across the table, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't quite comfortable either. Both of them knew they had come a long way, but the road ahead was still uncertain. David cleared his throat, looking down at his plate, then back at Joseph. "You know," David began, his voice softer than usual, we've come a long way. I didn't think we'd get here. I didn't think I'd ever want to sit at this table with you again." He paused, his eyes searching Joseph's face for some kind of response, some kind of acknowledgement. "But I guess I'm glad we're here." Joseph didn't answer right away, the weight of David's words settling on him. He had always believed this day would come, the day they would sit down without the walls of anger and pride between them. But now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to make of it. He had spent so many years fighting, pushing, believing that control was the only way to keep his family together. But now, as he looked at David, as he listened to him speak, Joseph realized that what they needed wasn't control. It was trust. And that would take time to rebuild. "I didn't know how to let go," Joseph finally said, his voice rough. "I thought if I held on tighter, everything would stay together, but I see now that I was wrong. I see that now." His voice faltered for just a second, the weight of regret pressing down on him. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for all the time we've lost." David's expression softened, though his eyes remained guarded. "I don't know if I can forgive you either, Dad," he said quietly. "But I'm trying. I'm really trying." The moment hung between them, fragile and tentative, but it was real. For the first time, they weren't just father and son. They were two people, sharing the weight of everything that had happened. And for all the pain, for all the frustration, there was something else there. A recognition, a willingness to move forward. In the kitchen, Rebecca and Samantha stood together, watching from the doorway. Samantha turned to Rebecca, her face tired but hopeful. "It's not perfect," Samantha said softly, "but it's a start. Maybe that's enough for now." Rebecca nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "I think they'll get there, slowly. They're not done yet, but maybe they never will be. Maybe this is how they rebuild, one step at a time." The family sat together, the meal before them a small victory. It wasn't the roaring, chaotic celebrations of the past, but it was something real. Joseph still felt the weight of what had been lost, but as he looked at David, at the subtle signs of change, he knew that the worst was behind them. They still had miles to go, but there was hope now. Hope that, with time, the cracks could be mended and maybe, just maybe, the family could find a new way to connect. David glanced up at Joseph, his expression conflicted but softer. "Thanks," he said quietly, the words tentative but sincere. Joseph nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, they had a future worth fighting for. The crisp air of early winter nipped at Joseph's cheeks as he and David walked side by side down the familiar path that wound through the park near their home. The ground beneath their feet was covered in a blanket of fallen leaves, their colors muted now, as if the earth itself had accepted the quiet resolution they were both beginning to feel. For the first time in what felt like years, the space between father and son was not defined by tension. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. David's hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, his step slow, reflective. He glanced over at Joseph, his face soft with a vulnerability Joseph had rarely seen. "I never thought I'd be here with you like this," David said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "I didn't think we'd ever get past all the things we've said to each other, the things I said." Joseph looked at him, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had come before. He had always been the one to push, the one who believed that if he just tried harder, held on longer, things would be better. But now, walking next to his son, he understood. The years of control, the years of pride, they had cost them everything. "I didn't think we'd get here either," Joseph admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'm glad we did." David's eyes flickered with something Joseph couldn't quite place. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe something deeper, something that had been buried beneath years of anger. "I know I pushed you away, but I also know you did the best you could. I don't think you ever meant to hurt me." He paused, looking ahead as if searching for the right words. "I'm grateful, Dad, for your willingness to change, for trying." Joseph felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was something real. The acknowledgement of the past, of the damage done, and of the effort to move forward. For the first time, Joseph allowed himself to believe that the work they had put in, the therapy, the conversations, the small steps, was worth something. Later that evening, the family gathered once again for a holiday dinner. The table was still small, the atmosphere quieter than it had been in years, but there was something different now. The weight of old accusations and unresolved anger no longer hung over their heads. Joseph looked around the table at Samantha, at David, at Rebecca, and felt a sense of peace, fragile but real. Samantha caught Joseph's eye and smiled, her gaze soft and knowing. "I think we've learned a lot through all of this," she said quietly, her voice full of reflection. "Not just about each other, but about ourselves, about what really matters." Joseph nodded, his mind drifting back to the long, difficult road they had walked to get here. "We've been through a storm, but maybe it was what we needed, to understand, to forgive." David, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up, his voice steady. "I used to think I had all the answers, that I was right, that you were wrong, Dad, but I see now that I've made my own mistakes. I've hurt people and I've hurt myself in the process." He looked at Joseph, the words more meaningful now than they had ever been. "I've learned a lot from you, from my mistakes." The room was still, the weight of his words settling over them. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic reconciliation, just a slow, steady acknowledgement of what had been and what could still be. The night wore on and the family shared stories, laughter slowly beginning to weave its way back into their conversations. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was enough. Joseph and David were beginning to see each other, not as enemies or even as father and son, but as two people who had survived something terrible and were now trying to build something new. As they walked into the future, Joseph and David both knew that the road would still be challenging, that the scars would take time to heal. But the past no longer defined them. They had forged something new together, a legacy of love and understanding, built from the wreckage of what had come before. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it didn't seem impossible.